Hello, BookTube. As I've mentioned in a few videos, probably a few more videos than you wish I would, Boston is looking down the barrel of a miniature little heat wave that's coming our way next week. The more I have seen pictures and statistics from the UK and Southern Europe, the less I have wanted to complain about that coming heat wave, because the whole area is just swathed in triple-digit Fahrenheit temperatures. 40, 41, 42, 45 degree temperature Celsius. That is astonishing. Places in the UK are recording temperatures they have never recorded before. Fully unprecedented high temperatures. And to make matters worse, in large parts of Spain, large parts of southern France, large parts of Germany and Austria, these are locations that never really built in air conditioning. They're not really suited for it. Most homes don't have it. That is, if you live up in northern Germany, your house is probably not going to have air conditioning, because it never occurred to anyone that you would be dealing with 115 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. And you are. I look at those maps, the heat maps for Europe are unbelievable. And I look at them and I think, oh, that's really bad. That looks a lot like the American Southwest. And I think, well, no, every single house and dog shed in the American Southwest has air conditioning. But none of those places do. Most of those people are getting by without. That's unbelievable. So, even though I've done it, in years past I have done it, and worse, I trekked through all of the near Middle East for the whole course of an absolutely ferocious summer. I've also done summers in Namibia. No small thing, but I was acclimated. I was younger. I might have been in my early 20s instead of my late 20s as now, and I didn't expect anything different. You know, you acclimate, you adapt. Suddenly the shade of a tree becomes a luxury. Now, though, I don't know. I don't know. If I were in Oslo and I were facing high 90-degree temperatures and it not going very low at night and I had no air conditioning, I don't know that I would be so even-tempered. But because I know that heat wave is coming, we're getting a bit of it here. We're not getting it anywhere near as bad as the rest of the country or the rest of Europe. But it looks like Boston will have a long stretch of days, 4, 5, maybe even 7 days, where the temperature crests 90 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. And the consecutive nature there is bound to make it feel pretty bad. And because I know that's coming, and because I've got kind of a sled load of work for this weekend, so I know I don't really want to go anywhere this weekend, I decided that was justification enough to go to the Brattle Book Shop here in Boston and shop again for books. I know what some of you are probably saying. Weren't you just there? Didn't you just go a day ago? Yeah, I did. But there's a heat wave coming. And also, in my own defense, the Brattle stocks and restocks its shelves so much that you can go every day. When I worked at at a big retail bookstore right around the corner from the Brattle, I went every day at lunch. You always find something new. In addition to which, next to the Brattle Book Shop, there's a sale lot. They have a sale lot of thousands of books. Thousands of them, all shapes and sizes, differentiated only by price, $1, $3, and $5. Even with the most attention in the world and an hour and a half to spare, you are going to miss books when you look at those books outside. Books that you see next time. That you, not just because your eyes aren't playing tricks on you, but because when the carts are wheeled into the shop at night, when they're wheeled back out, they're not in the same locations. And customers move the books around. You're going to see new things that were there the other day, but you missed them anyway. So I went back. I went back to the Brattle first thing, and it was lovely. In the morning, I had if there is going to be pestilential heat next week, the yardstick that I always use to determine that will be, how bad is it at night and in the early morning? Does the heat dissipate at all? Is there any hint of relief overnight? I have no idea what that will be like next week, but it was fine this morning, so I went and I got a pile of books. And in my own defense, I have 5 empty shelves in the little book room, and plenty of empty shelves out here. Plenty of them. So there is room. And I'm not saying that I'm going to keep all these things. I don't know how many of them are keepers. They're so cheap. that, when you're at the Brattle sale lot, you can just take a flyer on something. So let's see what we have here. The first one is by Thomas Mallon. I have praised this author many, many times, not for his historical fiction. His historical fiction drives me nuts. He wrote a book on Watergate, he wrote a book on Reagan, and he wrote a book on George W. Bush and Katrina called Landfall. And they're unspeakable. I don't know why any editor would sign off on them, but Thomas Mallon also wrote a book called A Book of One's Own about keeping a private journal. And it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And he wrote another book along those lines that I really like. Every time I get it, I give it away. And it's this. It's Yours Ever. And it's the same kind of treatment about personal journals, only this is about snail mail correspondence. This is about letters. Why people write them. Lots and lots of examples, but this is not an anthology of letters. It approaches snail mail correspondence the same way A Book of One's Own does journals, where it groups them thematically and talks about examples. Liberal quotations, but not just quotations. And I've read this when it first came out. When did this come out? I read this when it first came out, and of course I tremendously liked it. 2009. I loved it when I read it because it brought back memories. By 2009, even the last of my snail mail correspondences had died. And they're not coming back. Not as long as email exists. They're not coming back. But once upon a time, for a long time, I mean decades and decades and decades, a huge part of my life was snail mail correspondence. A huge part. It used to be the first thing that I did when I sat down at my desk to work. I had a pile of envelopes, I had books of addresses, and I had 2 stacks of mail to address and one tray of clean paper. I had everything all set out. I even had a roll of stamps for something that was short, maybe a business correspondence where I knew it would only need 1 stamp. And the 2 stacks were business correspondence, anything business related, and personal correspondence. And I did a huge amount of that every day. My goal was that I would do that first thing, therefore I would have a stack of letters ready to go out with the mail that day. At the the mailbox on the afternoon dog walk. Because I don't know how many of you remember snail mail correspondence, but that when your letter was picked up, how long it was in transit, those things became unbelievably important. You immediately, if it was personal correspondence, you immediately set the clock ticking when you mailed it. You immediately set the clock ticking. How long will it take to get to its recipient? Is this recipient the type that'll write back right away, or will they mull over it? Will I need to send a second letter to nudge them to answer the first one? How long will they have it? Then when they're done, when will they post it? And then when will it get to me? How long will it take to get to me? And one of the unwritten rules of epic personal snail mail correspondence was that if you had a telephone, but you weren't going to ask the person, did you get my letter? Did you write a response? When did you mail it? Unless you were a desperate kind of daffodil, you wouldn't ask that. The thrill was that it was a kind of communication that was happening completely separate from face-to-face encounters or the telephone. A realer kind of communication, a more true kind of communication. I loved it. I flatter myself to say, quite good at it. For the personal stuff, although even the professional stuff, the business letters, I always added personality and got many, many responses over the decades. I got many, many responses saying, well, I don't know if I can do anything about this refund, but your letter made me chuckle. I'm very glad you wrote. That sort of thing. Also, on the non-personal side of correspondence, I kept up a peppery correspondence with letters to the editor. And I still do. Only now you can do it by email and editors just ignore them. But once upon a time, you pay for a stamp to put in a letter in the mail. The guy in charge of the mailroom is going to pay attention to that. They won't necessarily care, but they're not going to view it as a trivial thing. There was no such thing when it came to personal, handwritten or manually typed letters to the editor. There was no such thing as a spam bot. There was no possibility of that. So it was a real person. And a real person, as many friends of mine at that end of the chain told me, represents actual subscriber money. That's a check for $6.95. So you don't just write that off. You write off too many of those, you're going to be out a lot of money. So I did that every day, and I have to confess, it never occurred to me for most of those decades. It never occurred to me that there was ever an alternative, that there would ever be an alternative. The phone, sure, but it wasn't long after you started getting phones, landlines in your house, that people started inventing automated call parks and answering machines. So, to fend off the immediacy of that communication, whereas letters felt different. And I had some titanic snail mail correspondences all over the world. And they one by one petered out. They one by one disappeared as email became a more and more ubiquitous part of life. To the point where everybody I knew had email. And if I wanted to write something to them, I could do it right away. I admit something intangible was lost. The anticipation even, which I hated. The thoughtfulness of a letter, the fact that you had to sit down and compose your thoughts, quite literally, that doesn't exist in most emails, so that's just gone. Also, the record is gone. Future historians will not have correspondences to dig into, to understand people, understand disputes. But this covers all of that. This covers everything from business to personal. And I've read it. I read it when I think I got a review copy of it back in 2009, and I've read it a couple of times, so I always get rid of it, usually to fellow fans of snail mail correspondence. I'm planning on keeping this copy since I found one at the Brattle. It's in perfect condition. Then this next one, I could not ignore, obviously. I've mentioned many times before that if the Brattle gods are trying, because the sale lot is not organized, so if the gods of the sale lot are trying to get a point across to you, if they are trying to reinforce an interest of yours, you had better pay attention. And amazingly, I found another biography of Cesare Borgia. This was 100 years old, and it's much bigger than the Sarah Bradford book that I found just the other day. There's no great strain to the imagination to think that they came from the same person. And this has. Let's see if I can do this without destroying it. This has fold-out maps that books don't have anymore. It'll go into great topographical detail. And it will give, it's in rotten shape. I would ordinarily not have taken it because it doesn't have a dust jacket and it's in terrible shape. But more and more, it's looking like maybe I will write a book about Cesare Borgia, or a story at least. And it'll be interesting to know what the scholarly consensus from 100 years ago was. The sources haven't changed much, so we'll see. In fact, I'll be curious to know. I haven't actually checked on it because I've had a bunch of stuff to do before I make these videos. But I'll be curious to know if Sarah Bradford, the author of the other biography, actually references Woodward at all in her bibliography. Since her book was written in 1976, I'm assuming it will still have a biography. It's only in the 21st century that scholarly works of history and biography just don't have bibliographies. Just take my word for it. Or you could comb through my notes and assemble a bibliography of your own. It's only in the 21st century that kind of barbarism has become normal. So Sarah Bradford's book will probably have a bibliography, and this might be in it. But I had to do it, of course. Then this next one is a collectible type thing, and I usually don't care about that sort of thing. At the Brattle or anywhere else. At the Brattle you can usually get these things cheap. Heritage Foundation or Folio Society or anything like that. You can usually get them cheap, but I usually don't care about such a thing. But the minute I looked through this thing, I realized that it will go on. I have a bookcase in the little book room of canonical classics that's actually bursting at the seams. And this is the perfect version of this. This is the Aspirin Papers by Henry James. In this cute little Folio Society edition, all by itself. Usually you'll get the Aspirin Papers collected with other things. But this one is all by itself and has these lovely illustrations. This is a novella that Henry James wrote. It's very controlled for Henry James and very good, about a scholar who may or may not be unscrupulous, who goes to Venice in search of the rumor of a trove of papers by a great poet. And he'll do pretty much anything it takes to get a look at those papers and maybe make some copies of them. He falls in with two women that radically different, but they end up being a sort of moral proving ground for him. And Venice is evoked beautifully in this book, not just with these pictures. Although the pictures, I should probably tell you, right? The pictures they're lithographs by Edward Piper. And this edition of the Aspirin Papers is dedicated to Edward Piper, so he croaked. He did these pictures, and that was all that the Folio Society got out of him. But first of all, I haven't read the Aspirin Papers in quite some time. I read it. I had an Oxford World Classics paperback. It was, I think, the Aspirin Papers and the Turn of the Screw or something like that. That's usually what you get. Usually don't get it on its own. But that was decades ago that I read. I haven't reread this in so long. So maybe I will give it. Maybe this will go on the reading for tonight. One of the little question marks hanging over any trip to the Brattle is: will anything actually make its way onto the reading that night? All of this stuff is going onto the shelves to see when I get to it and how I get to it and whether or not the wave recedes and leaves it behind, or does it just cycle through? I'm just going to enjoy it, sample it, and cycle through because I'm obviously not going to keep it. We shall see. But this is only an hour to read and to savor. I might do that tonight. Then this next one has very little in the way of justification. In fact, it has none. But I did it anyway. I was out there in the sale lot of the Brattle. I was annoying the two young people who are out there because I'm this weird Grandpa Simpson tail spinning customer who just comes in, has no respect for whether or not they're trying to get any work done. And I don't have any such respect either for Zach and Nicole, who are the managers of the store. I don't have any such respect for the owner and his wife. I don't have any respect for any of it. I just walk in and expect that I will natter for a while. But as I was standing there, one of these kids was bringing out new books for the carts. And the minute I saw that, he just shoved it in front of me. The minute I saw it, I thought, oh, I'm going to get that. Definitely. It's The Lord of the Rings, which ought to disqualify it right there. I have probably 10 different editions of The Lord of the Rings, but I've never seen this one before. Look at this thing. Is it possible that I bought today the ugliest edition of Lord of the Rings that has ever existed? Is that possible? What are these creatures down there? What are they? What are these creatures down at the bottom? Is that supposed to be Gollum? This is, I think, UK. Yeah, this is UK. It's got 2 pounds 10 on the spine. It's just the book. I will reinforce it. I don't even know who to blame for this. I would probably have grabbed this anyway, because how weird to see a Lord of the Rings edition that I've never seen before. Never even seen a picture of it before. Maybe I was prompted to do it by David Murphy, who once upon a time in the 1920s made BookTube videos. On Instagram the other day, he put up a picture of himself holding up a copy of Lord of the Rings and saying, why not? Maybe I'll dig into it. That immediately made me think of the book and made me think of a massive read-along, which I would love to do. I'd love to get 20 BookTube channels to do a read-along of Lord of the Rings. What fun that would be. Oh my. I bet I could even pick the 20 channels that I would ideally want, but none of them would do it. Nobody wants to do book read-alongs with me because they hate me, because I smell. But I had to grab this. And maybe this will also, once I reinforce it, maybe I'll read a bit of it tonight. Maybe some of the appendices. That's fairly pointed, since we've only got a month left until Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, shows up on TV. Then this next one was a good turn. I did a good turn. I was a good citizen. This is Sir Osbert Sitwell. Not a name that a lot of you are going to know. There is Sir Osbert with Wilson, his boyhood lover from their days at Eton. And this is sort of a companion volume. Osbert Sitwell was of the Sitwell family. They were well-to-do. They had castles and manors and mansions in a few different countries. They were painted by John Singer Sargent. For God's sake, you don't get much more of a hoity-toity calling card than that. They were painted by John Singer Sargent when little Osbert was a tiny tyke on the rug. And he did an autobiography in, I think, 4 volumes. It is terrific. It is just amazingly good. And I saw that autobiography at the Brattle today in a lovely uniformed UK edition, with all sorts of artwork on the spine. Didn't look anything like this. All sorts of artwork on the front, and sepia tone photographs on the inside of liberally throughout. that autobiography was all there, and then the companion volumes that Sitwell wrote. He wrote a couple of companion volumes to his autobiography, and they were also there in that set. And the only one that I wanted was Noble Essences, which is his sort of, it's a collection of profiles, of mini biographies of people that he has known. So who have we got in here? Ronald Furbank, Wilfred Owen, Gabriel D'Annunzio, Walter Sickert, who was Patricia Cornwell's candidate for Jack the Ripper. Who have we got here? Arnold Bennett. And this is the volume that I wanted, and I originally picked up the volume from that set, which is likewise was gorgeously decorated, gorgeously illustrated with sepia photographs of the people involved, which means a lot when it's a gallery of biographies. And then I saw this volume that doesn't have any illustrations in it, doesn't have any photographs, doesn't have any of the decorative filigree all around. And I chose this instead of the other version because I thought somewhere out there, someone is going to want this whole set. The Brattle's not selling it as a set. Probably it will end up in the dollar cards. Probably doesn't matter. It will probably still come to me. But I had a selfless Mother Teresa moment where I thought, no, I won't get the volume that is technically a little better. I'll leave it so that it's part of a uniform set, so that if somebody comes along, they'll get the whole set. Instead of gnashing their teeth and pulling their hair out because there's one volume missing. Aren't I a saint? St. Donoghue. So I got this instead. And it's going to be a blast to reread. In fact, I'm not sure that I've read everything in here. Some of the famous profiles in here I know that I've read, but I might not have ever read the whole book. Oh God. All right, we have a raft of things for the gaze. You got to use something for the gaze at all times. The first one is a novel that I read when it first came out. When was that? 2003. And I kind of liked it. It's a gay novel, as you will be able to tell by looking at it. It's Where the Boys Are by William J. Mann. That is the cover, and only slightly less pornographic is the author. And it's a story of three young guys who aren't getting any younger and who are needing to face reality in the wake of the death of a key mentor-type figure to all three of them. And, it's full of party scenes and dance scenes and sex scenes and Provincetown scenes from a Provincetown that used to be but isn't really anymore. But I thought, when I read this 20 years ago when it first came out, and my strongest impression coming away from it might not have been the strongest thing the author did, it just might chime with me, was that element of mentorship. What that means. What the personal relationships, in other words. You wouldn't think that'd be a very strong element in a book that looks like this. And I can't figure out the size of this thing either. The hardcover that I had was bigger than this. But do the gays have their own book club with customized book sizes? Don't seem like that sort of thing. I don't know one way or another, but I haven't read this in forever. I saw it. It was dirt cheap, so I'll grab it. I have a long and colorful history with Provincetown myself. Those of you who don't know what I'm talking about. Massachusetts, the state of Massachusetts, where I live, the greatest state in the Union, is a rectangle, but there's a fishhook extending out into the Atlantic Ocean. And the very tip of that fishhook is a town called Provincetown, which for a long time has been one of the country's gay meccas. And in the early 80s, before AIDS, Provincetown reached a kind of peak. And I had a lot of fun every season there. You wouldn't think it would be true, looking like sunburned boot gristle, but I had other qualities that could make up for it, and I had lots and lots of fun. And there are some photos out there, including a whole string of photos that I don't have. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen them. Of a certain afternoon that was a lot of fun. Anyway, I remember Provincetown being fairly well evoked in this book, but I'm curious to know what aspects of this book will jump out at me this time, so long afterwards. And then, speaking of AIDS, this next thing is something I've never seen before. I've only heard about it. I will finally get to read it. And we lost its author to AIDS. He died fairly young, late 20s, I think. The author is Sam D'Alessandro. And this is a book of his stories that was put together by his longtime companion, Kevin Killian. This is what it looks like, unfortunately. You've got a cool kid, and you know he's cool because he's giving himself mouth cancer. So if AIDS doesn't get you. But this is a tiny little thing. This will certainly go on the pile for tonight. This is the one thing of his that was really conducive to being collected. There's a lot of other stuff, too. I don't know, actually, the state of Sam D'Alessandro's body of work, his papers, that sort of thing. I don't really know the state of that. Is there more than this? Is there a bigger volume of random jottings and collections of unfinished work? I don't know. But this is going to be sort of a note in a bottle from a different era. So I couldn't really turn it down. And the next two are a pair. You often see them together in bookstores, and they still deal with the gays. The first one is this. This is the old Noonday. This is FSG, right? Yes. The old Noonday trade paperback of Marguerite Yourcenar's The Memoirs of Hadrian. With this very distinctive cover. I've had this in hardcover. I've had it in a mass market. But I always come back to this volume, even though it's not particularly well made. It never really survives a reading, but I always manage to come back to it. This is a weird stream of consciousness, just phantasmagorical historical novel about Hadrian and his love for a teenage Greek boy named Antinous. Hadrian was, of course, the emperor of the Roman Empire. He was Trajan's successor. And a balanced, largely just, largely intelligent figure who just lost his cookies for this one boy. Made him, this thing, if I remember, this is illustrations all throughout. This is a weird paperback, and I can't help but think of this book as part of this paperback, so I just don't bother anymore. Now, when I see it in trade paperback, I just get it. This is Antinous. There's one idealized statue. There are lots of others, and there are also buildings and friezes and frescoes. And why? Because Hadrian loved Antinous so much that he turned Antinous into a god to be worshipped. Temples, roads, cities named Antinoupolis. His reaction to the loss of his boy toy may be the single greatest act of public grief ever. I can't think of one that is any greater. He reshaped the empire in large part. There were cities you could go to. There were roads. There were ships. There was a religion. In fact, this book has a picture of Antinous as a god. Does it not? Don't I remember that? Boy, it's been so long since I went through this. And I'm already very delicately handling it, which is just maddening. I'm already delicately... Yeah, there we go. There's Antinous as Osiris. I'm already very delicately handling this thing, and I know already it's not going to matter. I don't know how many copies of this trade paperback I've worked my way through. What I need is a hardcover that looks like this. A hardcover that has this cover, this odd cover. I mean, that's an odd design for a cover that has all the illustrations in it. I don't think such a thing was ever made. A hardcover was made of this novel in this translation. This is... is this going to tell me who does the translation? This is translated from the French by Grace Frick. And there is a hardcover of this, but I want this version. So I grabbed that, which primed me for this next thing, which is by Royston Lambert. This is Beloved and God. And this is a history of Hadrian and Antinous. So it's not a imagist novel. Instead, it's biography. This is in fairly ratty shape. I am just going to fix this. I have had this over and over and over again, trades and hardcovers. I'm not going to get rid of this one. I'm just going to hold on to it. I think Hadrian has never had a great biography. Amazingly, he never has. I think this is the closest that we come. It's a little bit myopic to reduce him to just Antinous, and this book doesn't do that. This book has a lot of research that went into this. In fact, I don't know one way or another, but I wouldn't be half surprised if packaging this so that the emphasis is on the relationship wasn't the author's idea, was his publisher's idea instead. I could be wrong about that, but I'm gonna reinforce this and then give it a reread. I think I'm building to a large Roman history reread, and when that comes, that'll be on there. Same thing with this next one. This next one came out fairly recently, right? When did this come out? 2010, and that is this. This is by Robin Fleming, and it's Britain After Rome, which takes you from 8400 all the way to the Norman Conquest. So all of those years in the middle period, after Rome left its former possession, and before that possession really became a world power on its own. And I really liked this when I read it back in, 10 years ago. I really enjoyed it. I don't think this is by Alan Lane, so this is actually a UK edition, as you can tell from the already oxidizing pages. I had the American edition look just like this, and I got it soon after it came out in this country. I think I got the advanced copy and then the finished copy, and I think I wrote about it. I'll try to find it. If I did, I'll try to find it. But I love this period. It's so easy to mischaracterize this period, and people always do. And I love reading about it. I remember really enjoying this book. I'd never seen it used until today. The instant I saw it, I thought, oh, well, grab that, definitely. And these things were all cheap. So I didn't need to worry. I needed to worry a bit. They were cheap, but they weren't free. I couldn't help but notice that no one has called in a credit at the Brattle for Steve in quite some time. So the two of you who've made it this far in the video might want to pool your resources and do something about that. I don't like walking up to the register of the Brattle and actually paying for things. I'm a YouTube influencer. The last thing here is Ticknor & Fields. This is an oversized book. I try not to get oversized books. I inevitably cycle through them. I don't know whether or not I will with this one. This is by James Graham Campbell, and it is The Viking World. There's the famous Oslo Horde longship there. And the reason you get something like this is because of the profuse illustrations all throughout. But I will sample it for the text as well. I don't think I'll do the text of this thing right away, not tonight. But definitely this weekend. I'm going to leave all these things on an accessible shelf and go through a lot of them this weekend. And once upon a time, I had 2 or 3 bookcase shelves full of Viking books. Because they're so fascinating. They're just so endlessly fascinating. And I had a number of big illustrated things like this, but I didn't have this one. So I grabbed it. It was cheap. It wasn't free because you people are slacking off on upkeeping me in the style of living to which I am accustomed. I'll say no more about that. But that was my trip to the Brattle for a pre-Heatwave. I'm not going to go this weekend. I've got lots of stuff to do this weekend, so I'm not going to go this weekend. And I don't know if I'm going to go next week. If next week turns out to be iniquitous, if night times and early mornings are hot as well as the middle of the day, then I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to bother to go on my own and be miserable, getting there and standing there and coming back, but I'm also not going to leave the bean during a situation like that. We'll just stay together. It'll just be ironic that we're confined to the house the minute we're free. The Brattle will still be there. So that's my Brattle haul for today, the Viking World. Pictures, but I'm hoping it's got a brain behind it as well. Britain After Rome. I remember this being really good. Looking forward to seeing what my second impression is. Beloved and God, and the Memoirs of Hadrian. The 2 real seminal Hadrian books that you kind of sort of have to have. Then The Wild Creatures by Sam D'Alessandro. And while we're on the subject of Provincetown and people who had lots of fun there, Where the Boys Are by William J. Mann. Then Noble Essences, a collection of biographical profiles by Wilson's former boy toy, Osbert Sitwell. They broke up, of course. Osbert Sitwell finally woke up to the nightmare and thought, oh, I don't want any of this. And then a little-known book called Lord of the Rings for £2. A Lord of the Rings trade paperback that doesn't look anything like any other one that I have, and doesn't look anything like any one that I've ever seen. The one Lord of the Rings trade paperback that I never see, that I wish I'd bought when I stocked it in a bookstore, was a big 1-volume trade paperback in red, with a dragon rampaging on the cover, even though no dragon rampages in the book. I remember that trade paperback vividly. I wish I'd grabbed it. I've never seen it used. Not in 40 years. But this will do. In the meantime, this will do. Then the aspirin papers, in one of these collectible Folio Society things. It was only $1, so it's not collectible anymore. And ordinarily I wouldn't do it, but this is as nice as an edition of this as I'm ever going to see. Another biography of Cesare Borgia. This one is not new; it's 100 years old, but we'll see what the scholars were saying back then. And Yours Ever by Thomas Mallon, his companion book to A Book of One's Own about snail mail. So there you go. That is the my Brattle haul for today. A pretty good haul, second haul of the week. I'm going to leave it at that. There won't be a third Brattle haul this week, I promise. But I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.